about deployments. A deployment provides declarative updates for pods, or in other words, it'll manage your pods. It'll make sure that your pods are updated, alive, load balanced, that sort of thing. So you describe a desired state in a deployment, and the deployment controller changes that state to changes the actual state of the pod to the desired state that you wanted at a controlled rate. It'll make sense in a second. So let's try this sample. Now the kubectl apply -f says apply the following file. And the following file is this URL. So I'm just going to copy and paste that. Obviously, you could also download it. And then if I paste it in, it says it's created. Let's do a kubectl get deployments. I don't know why it puts that apps at the end, but whatever. So it says 0 of 3 are ready. Let's do our get pods. Looks like there's 3 pods running. So this deployment says it should always have 3 instances of a container, or of a pod, I'm sorry, running. So if I do that again, you should say 3 of 3. Kubectl describe deployment. And since that's the only one that we have, I don't have to put a name in, but we can go see some information about this deployment. It's in the default namespace. I've got a label applied to it, some selectors. Here's some replicas information. So we want 3 desired pods. In order to get us into that state, it had to update or create 3 of them. And now it's saying, all right, you have 3 total that we've created, and there's 3 of those 3 that are available. Some information about how we're going to apply updates when we release new pods. Some other information we don't really care about, but here's the pod spec. So we already know what a pod is, and this pod is based on 1 container Nginx and so forth and so on. A bunch of other things we don't really need to worry about. But let's just take a look at what happens if I delete one of those pods. So kubectl get pod, delete pod, and I'm just going to do Nginx deployment, just arbitrarily choose one. Now, if what I've told you is true, you can see that it resurrected it because or created an instance of a new pod, assigned a new name to it, because the deployment is managing these. Again, so now I've got these 3 pods. I've got a service we haven't talked about yet, but here's my deployment. So as long as that deployment exists, it's always going to try and make sure that I have 3 of those ready. Let's see, scaling. So a scaling event for a deployment is when I increase or decrease the number of pods. So here I have a single deployment right here. And as we scale that deployment, in this particular case, I have a bunch of different pods that are spread across multiple nodes. And we have a service, which we have not talked about, that is the networking endpoint for all those, but we'll talk about that later. So scaling out a deployment will ensure new pods are created and scheduled to nodes with available resources. Scaling in will reduce those number of pods. If we run multiple instances of an app, we will then have to load balance between them, and a service will do that inherently for us, which we have yet to talk about. Services will also make sure the traffic is only sent to pods that are available. Let's look at our scaling. So let's try this command and scale, because right now we're at 3. Let's go to 4, and let's look at our get. So you can see that it's in the container creating phase. It's creating this new pod. I have 3 out of 4 that are ready, 3 that are available, and that eventually when it comes to consensus or whatever, it should say 4 of 4 ready. Let's try if I can scale down. Let's scale down to 2. And if I do a get all, I've requested 2. You can see it randomly terminates 2 of them. And I don't know how it decides to do that, because this one is one of the newer ones. This is one of the older ones. So looks like it just randomly does that. Oh yeah, we could do this. Kubectl get pods minus O wide, just to give us the pods again, but it gives us some additional information about the pod, status and the IP address, and what node it's running on, so that might be useful. And let's still make sure we can curl. Well, this is an Nginx, so what would I curl? 10.1.219.4. Yep. So we can still get there. So let me stop this video.